Are you live now?
Yeah.
You're not on there yet. Oh, there you are. Okay, you're on. That has a late reaction, but you can start in 10, I guess. Analia, Anna put morning.
Morning. No, I'm trying to pull it up on my laptop too. It's not pulling up. Trying to sort this out real quick, and we'll start in a sec. For some reason it's not pulling up on my laptop, but I know people are here. Is it pulling up for your phone?
Not on my phone.
It's weird. It's not pulling up on my laptop either. I mean, it's there. It's right there.
You're there. 3 people are watching.
Yeah, I know. But I'm trying to pull it up
Yeah, you got my phone now.
so I can see the comments, but I don't see them.
Here, I'll just here. Comments are on my phone.
Okay, sweet.
Christy and Anna said good morning.
Okay, sweet. I can see comments now. Great. So we're good. For some reason it wasn't pulling up, but I found a way. Okay. Hope everyone's doing great this morning, and hopefully we can all learn a little bit about the lesson that we're going to be discussing today. We're going to be in Job, we're going to continue in Job like we have been the past few weeks, and we're going to be in Job chapter 16 this time. And a little brief summary of kind of what's transpired up until this point is you have Job's been stricken, right? He's had all these problems, and you know the story. And what happens is his friends came up and started giving mourning, and then that mourning turned to criticizing, and then that criticizing turned into what we have right now, where Job's responding to his what you would call friends. And his response to them, and also his response to God, is what happens in chapter 16. And in doing so, when he describes his response to these guys, he's actually outlining sort of the criteria of what it means to be a truly good friend, and what not to do in the case that his friends did in this case. Actually did, what not to do. So we are going to start here by reading the first couple verses of the chapter 16 of Job. And it says, this is chapter 16, 1-5. It says, "Then Job replied, 'I have heard many things like these. Miserable comforters are you all. Will your long-winded speeches never end? What ails you that you keep on arguing? I also could speak like you. If you were in my place, I could make fine speeches against you and shake my head at you. But my mouth would encourage you. Comfort from my lips would bring you relief.'" So what happened here is he's criticizing these guys. Basically, this whole entire time, these people have been sort of doubting Job's faithfulness, and they're telling him, go to God, repent, and do these things, and you must have reflect on your life and look back on your life and figure out what you did to cause all this hardship to you. And he's like, guys, I'm good. Like, me and God are good. Like, you need to be better friends and have more faith in this. And that's not what they did. And they kept, sort of giving him all these comments and all these things, saying all these things to him. And he's like, look, guys, I've heard all these things from you before. Like, it's not changing. And you guys are being miserable comforters. You're not being good friends. And in doing so, he's like, I could do the same. If these roles were reversed, I could do the same thing to you and say all these nasty, mean things, and you wouldn't like it. But the thing is, if the roles were reversed, he says, I wouldn't do that. He says his mouth would encourage them and bring them comfort. And so, we have to recognize in the situation that true friends, in this case, this is the first tenet of what Job is trying to portray, is that true friends empathize with you. True friends come to an understanding of how you are feeling through some connection, and they get it. They get your sorrow, they get your pain, and they help you heal through that. They don't try to criticize you or give you any sort of lesson on what you need to do with your life, or trying to turn the table against you. No, they empathize with you. They come to an understanding of what your feelings are in this situation, and they help you heal. This is the total opposite of what his friends did. But even though it is the total opposite, we have to recognize that that's not the way, that criticizing people who are in pain, criticizing these people, or coming to them and telling them all these things is not the right way to be a true friend. And he continues to do this. If we break this down verse by verse here in these first 5 verses, that first verse, it says, I have heard many things like these. He says, miserable comforters, all you are you all. And in this first verse, Job reminds his critics, all his friends, I suppose, that all they gave him was like conventional wisdom, sort of cliches, sort of sayings and proverbs, like just conventional things. And he's heard them all before, and they're not helping him. They're not helping him sort of get through this suffering. And everybody, and what his friend's saying is, everyone knows these things, right? He's heard these things all the time. And since if you're in this situation and all you got is cliches, it's better just to do what these guys did in the very beginning, and that's to not say anything. If you remember in the beginning of this, when his 3 friends first saw him, as soon as they saw his pain, as soon as they saw his discomfort, they didn't say anything. They tore their clothes, right? And they buried their head in the ground and whatnot, and they stayed in silence for 6 days in mourning of their friend. And Job is saying, instead of saying all these things, these ancient wisdom, all these things that I've heard before, all these proverbs, all these cliches, and so you're not helping me, instead of saying these things, it's better for you to just not say anything. And then the second part of that first verse is he's calling them miserable comforters, because that's exactly what's happening. They're not good friends. Job hoped that this reproach or this sort of indignation of his friends would shame any of his accusers into seeing just how greatly they failed him. He was trying to put it in plain terms how much these friends had failed him in comforting him and helping him, and it wasn't the way true friendship should have been, and simply put, he was trying to tell them that. When we go on to the third verse here, it says, "Will your long-winded speeches never end? What ails you that you keep on arguing?" Job wanted, in this case, Job is trying to explain and to his friends that they need to stop all this spewing of their nonsense, right? Anything that they said lacked any substance. And, these speeches, that they were full of condemnation of Job. And it seems that this part of Job's trial, this whole entire, all through Job, he's going through a trial. This part of Job's trial, where his friends are condemning him, it's almost like the losses of that friendship is almost as great, as everything he had lost previously to this. He lost his family, he lost his wealth, he lost all his sons and his relatives, and it's almost like losing his friends. And in this case of their conscious condemnation of Job was just as bad of a loss to Job as losing everything else. And I think that speaks to the power of friendship and how truly important that your relationships with people are, how truly valuable they can be. And the fourth verse, it says, I could also speak like you if you were in my place. I could also make fine speeches against you and shake my head at you. Again, Job is recognizing, telling his friends that, guys, I could do the same thing you're doing, but you have to realize that this is wrong. He could have this unsympathetic condemnation towards these guys, his friends, that they had towards him. But you have to realize that that's not the correct way to behave in a friendship, in a relationship. It's almost like this suffering here that he's gone through has changed him, maybe changed his viewpoint, because he tells them in the next point, he says, but my mouth would encourage you. Comfort from my lips would bring you relief. It's one thing to be in a situation on the receiving end. So in this case, he is on basically the back end of this. He's getting all of the pain and all the torment and all the suffering. And speaking from that experience, he's telling his friends, like, look, guys, this is not what I need. And he's telling them, what I need right now is what I would do for you. And listen to me because I'm in this situation. So if you ever have a friend who's in hurt or in pain or in turmoil and they're going through things in their life, you need to be supportive and probably listen to Job here a little bit. And it says, the things that come out of your mouth, make sure they encourage people, make sure they lift people up. Right? Make sure they comfort you. Because if they're just plain trivialities, if they're just sort of cliches that you're just going through the motions that you don't really know what to say, it's better for you to be silent. We have to come to our friends in times of need from the correct place. And we don't just say something to say something. Make sure you mean it. And once we do those things, we can understand the first tenet that we talked about today is that we need to recognize that true friends empathize. So make sure you're always coming from a place of understanding. It'll make everything you say much more impactful and meaningful. The next part of friendship that Job teaches us here in this chapter is that your true friends affirm you. Your true friends sort of, reassure you. And we're going to be reading on this part, Job 16, chapter 16, verses 15 to 21. And verses 15 to 21 say this. I'm going to read through them and then we'll go through them. It says, I have sewed sackcloth over my skin and buried my brow in the dust. My face is red with weeping. Deep shadows ring my eyes. Yet my hands have been free of violence, and my prayer is pure. O earth, do not cover my blood. May my cry never be laid to rest. Even now my witness is in heaven, my advocate is on high, my intercessor is my friend. As my eyes pour out tears to God on behalf of man, he pleads with God as a man pleads for his friend. So what's going on here? There's the overarching, thing here is that Job in this case, in the previous verses here, he's admitting that he's all worn out, that he's tired, that he's broken down, and that in arguing against God, it's what he's been doing for this whole entire period. And he felt that God himself had worn him out, and that he'd given him over to to the ungodly. And in this case, the ungodly is everything that's happened to him, plus now his friends, because of what they have. And it's broken him, right? And he's admitted that through this deep evidence here that we just read, this evidence of deep, deep mourning, right? He's sewed sackcloth over his skin. He's buried his brow in the dust. He's taken his head and just shoved in the dirt out of pain and suffering. This is a response to somebody who's in pain, and he's crying out in this case to make sure that the world hears him. He says, "O earth, do not cover my blood. May my cry never be laid to rest." And in this case, he's crying to the world, basically, to make sure that what's happened to him is never, forgotten. This testimony that he's gotten, that he has here. In spite of Job here feeling that he's been mistreated, he maintains his hands have been free of violence or sin or anything like that. He's saying that his prayers were pure, and unlike what his friends have done to him, he would have tried to affirm them if things had been reversed, right? Job longed for friends who would function as an intercessor and who would plead for a friend. But the opposite happened in this case. His friends instead scorned him and tore him down. And in this case, he's directly crying for someone to intercede on his behalf. He says, "My intercessor is my friend." And there's something much deeper here in what Job describes. This may seem just on the surface like a description of the true roles of friendship, but in actuality, it actually speaks to something much greater, I think. There's been commentary and analysis on this that almost seems like Job knew something about the future thousands of years before it happened. That's how close he was to God. And even in this particular case here, he was looking for some intercessor on his behalf. That in this verse here, he says, "Surely, even now my witness is in heaven. My advocate is on high." Right? So, in talking about his friendship, he speaks to the role of somebody we should all know very well. In the midst of all this, he believed God knew the truth about him and about and would be his witness, right? In the midst of all this mental and spiritual struggle at work inside of Job, he nevertheless truly believed that God had a righteous witness in heaven that would vindicate him and act as a true friend to him, right? One that might plead for man. That's what it says. And my advocate in heaven, my intercessor is my friend. As my eyes pour out tears to God on behalf of man, he pleads with God as a man pleads for his friend. Now, who is he describing here? Much more than the role of friendship. He's describing the exact role of Jesus Christ. In his description of how a true friend should be, he almost exactly describes how Jesus Christ is. My intercessor. Jesus Christ, it's crazy because this is thousands of years before any of that happened. And he's describing it perfectly. Jesus Christ to us is our intermediator, he's our mediator, which he's basically our link and our bridge to God. We go through Jesus Christ now. And it's almost like he was describing that all the way back then. Job anticipated that his need would be filled by some spiritual being that would act on his behalf, and that person is Jesus Christ, who would act on as his mediator, and as an advocate, as a friend, who would plead on our behalf, and that's what he does for us. And that perfectly describes how true friendship should be. Someone who is going to be there to affirm us, to support us, to act on our behalf, and always back us up. And coincidentally enough, that's also what we have to recognize that Jesus is doing for us. And once we come to the realization that, that is how we should act as friends. That is how our friends should act. We can start to understand our relationship with Jesus Christ a little bit better, and that how this relationship with Him should be close as a friend, close as a best friend. Talk to Him, and marvelous things will happen. The next part that we are going to be describing is that true friends are kind and dependable. And for this, we're actually going to be looking at Job 6, 12-17. And I'm going to read it real quick. And it says, "Do I have the strength of stone? Is my flesh bronze? Do I have any power to help myself now that the success has been driven from me? A despairing man should have the devotion of his friends, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. But my brothers are as undependable as intermittent streams, as the streams that overflow when darkened by thawing ice and swollen with melting snow, but that cease to flow in the dry season. In the heat, they vanish from their channels." This indignation, this criticism of his success, of everything that had disappeared from him, of his friends, it's plain as day. He did not, Job seems like to me as a proud man, proud at least in his faith, and that's. Sometimes it can be pretty hard to walk that line. He was very, very, very strong in his faith, and he was very sure that he was faithful to God. But even though he was sure that his faith in God had endured through all this, he was still humble in some regard. He was still understanding that he did not have the strength to overcome all. And he says here in the first couple verses that I read to clarify that. His strength, he doesn't have the strength of stone. His skin isn't made from bronze, right? He doesn't have the power to help himself, and he's recognizing that these things he does not have on his own. He's not strong enough. He's doesn't have enough power. His skin isn't literally made of bronze that can sort of hold up to piercing arrows and daggers, and he's making sure that is known, and that he needs support and needs help. But where does that help come from? Well, on the top level, it comes from God. God helps us, but God helps us, right, in ways in which sometimes we don't know. God helps us by surrounding us with people, surrounding us with friends, or maybe God helps you individually by being a better friend, right? So, and then therefore he can be better friend to other people. But in this case, that didn't happen because he was going through his trial, and his friends that were there, like raging streams that have always been full of life and water, they disappeared, right? And that's what he says here. They were as intermittent streams. They were gone. They vanished. They ceased to flow in the dry season, in this dry season that he was going through in his life. And what we need to take from this is to recognize that is not how we need to be to our friends. We need to be, as I said earlier, when Job describes it, we need to be dependable. We need to be kind. We need to be there in times of need. Because if you aren't, then you're not you're not really a true friend. And we need to sort of reflect on that a little bit and sort of come to terms in our own life, how we can improve on our relationships based off of this, very, very famous story in Job. We need to come to an understanding that all of us are weak, that we go through things, that we don't have the strength that we think we might, and that we are going to need the help of others, and that it is so vitally, vitally important to have true friends and that go through us, that go through these things with us. And what we talked about today sort of describes that. If you want to be a true friend, you need to empathize with people. You need to affirm them. You need to sort of act on their behalf and support them. And you also need to be kind and dependable as a raging, stream, as it says. And if you do those, three things, if you do those three things, you'll be a lot better off. And it's interesting is because, if Job's friends had done those things, we wouldn't have this lesson here today. And we wouldn't know that that's what we need to do in terms of our relationships with others. But now we do. And also something that Job did not have that helps all of us infinitely greater is the role that Jesus plays in our lives. That intercessor that he was talking about at the end of chapter 16 was exactly that, Jesus Christ. And although Jesus Christ, his role wasn't fulfilled, the Messiah wasn't fulfilled in this context all the way back when Job was alive, it is fulfilled today. And we do have somebody who will act on our behalf. If you don't have anybody in your life, and you need to know that there is always someone who's dependable, who empathizes with you, who understands everything that goes through your mind and supports you and is kind and dependable, and that is Jesus Christ. He was, he was God, but he was also human, and he suffered everything that we suffered. He suffered temptation. He suffered the hatred of humanity. He was literally murdered. And he's gone through everything that we could possibly imagine. And he can empathize with us. There's nothing that Jesus didn't go through, or that there's nothing that we have gone through that Jesus didn't go through. And once we recognize that he can understand us 100% without fail, we can strengthen our relationship with him and go to him in times of need. Always. This lesson here is kind of short in that it's all about the responsibility of friendship. And as we wrap it up here, the next lesson that we're going to continue, it'll also be in Job. I'll try to make it a little bit longer and bring in some more material for it. But as we end this, we gotta understand those things, that friends need to empathize, they need to be affirm people, and we need to be kind and dependable. And his friends weren't at their best, but we can strive to be better. So let's all, take a personal challenge and think of a friend who's gone through a tough time and prayerfully consider how we can lovingly serve that person, how we can be better friends to everybody in your life, and how we can basically get down in the dirt with them. And what I mean by that is like these guys did, how we can tear the clothes off and throw our heads in the sand and mourn with them. How can we be better support structures for everybody that we know? How can we sacrificially do what God calls us to do? Let's reflect on our relationships in life. Let's reflect on everything that we do, and let's basically be better Christians because of it. That's what I have here, guys. That is sort of the wraps up the lesson. There's not any more. I don't have any more material in this lesson here. I tried to drag it out a little bit. Let me know if you have any thoughts on the actual lesson and how it resonates with your life. And remember, guys, this personal challenge that you have, think of a friend who's going through downtime and be with them and pray for them and empathize with them and do everything that you can to sort of do what God calls us to do. I appreciate everybody here. Sorry, this is a short lesson here, and I will try and make it a little more extended next time. So that's the end of it, guys. I appreciate it. Thanks.